Hi there, I'm Jay, and I'm going to talk for a bit about the Philippines. For starters, I'm an American, and I'm married to a Filipina. Our story is a little bit unique. I'll just give a little bit of background. We were in a long-term relationship, long-term relationship for years before we started living together, and we got married last year, and we've been married over a year now. I just got back from having our church ceremony in Manila, even though we had been married civilly for over a year, which was a nightmare dealing with all the paperwork and stuff like that. But that's another story. Not really talking about that right now. But um, I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I experienced, and I'm really interested in what some Filipino responses to some of this. I've been to the Philippines. I believe this was like my sixth time, number six. So I'm not a naive newbie there. I can make my way around Manila by myself. I do speak some Tagalog. I'm not Filipino at all, but just over the years, I've picked up quite a bit, and my understanding is a lot better. My speaking is not that great, but at my wedding, I sang a song in Tagalog. I try to contribute to the dinner table conversation in Manila in Tagalog when I can. One thing I do admire about Filipinos a lot is if you're an American and you make the barest effort to learn Tagalog, they're very appreciative and they go, "Oh, he speaks Tagalog," when you just say one thing, which is overblown, but it's very kind of them because some other cultures I don't know why. Uh, for example, I do speak some Japanese, but if you try speaking Japanese that's not flawless Japanese, they just kind of shut their brain down and ignore you or something. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but Filipinos seem very gracious to a Westerner making any effort to speak Tagalog, which is uh, very supportive. It makes you want to try more to learn the language. But it's also hard too because you can get by pretty well in the Philippines with just English. So sometimes that kind of makes me really lazy. When I'm in I have this thing where I go to the Philippines and then for 3 weeks or whatever, I try to speak as much Tagalog and learn as much as I can, and then I come home and immediately kind of forget a lot of it. So right now I'm kind of in the decompression mode where I've come home, but this time I really want to keep with my Tagalog and learn more. And I got a really good app on my tablet that's really really helpful. I think it's just called Learn Tagalog or something. But anyways, my my wife and I met online 8 or 9 years ago now, and I think it's unusual because a lot of the Americans that marry Filipinas tend to be older white guys, which if you're Filipino, you know what a Joe type is, which I'm not since we're the same age, which is unusual for Phil-Am couplings. But we're the same age. I'm a year and some change older than my wife. And then also, I'm not a divorcee, which is kind of different too. So I don't know any other couple that's kind of young and kind of married purely. I don't want to. It sounds so judgmental, but purely out of love because I actually my wife went to Ateneo, and she had a really good job in the Philippines before I kind of petitioned for her, and I don't have any college education. I work for myself, just kind of self taught, and so I think, for example, when she was getting during the application process right before she got here on the fiance visa, she had to go to a meeting, and she said she kind of stuck out because a lot of the other Filipinas had much older fiancés, and they didn't speak really good English, which we'll get into that later. But kind of for people that aren't Filipino, English ability is kind of tied with class in the Philippines. I noticed, at least that's my perception. Is, for example, one time when I was coming home from the Philippines, by myself, obviously, when I was just still engaged to my wife, um, you go to Naiya, whichever one the crappy one is. I think Naiya 1 or Naiya 3, I forget. But I was in the crappy one, and this one guy, one customs agent, he was telling me, or security agent, he was telling me to take my shoes off, but he had such a thick Filipino accent, I could not understand him. Because he said it was like, take off your shoes, kind of like that. But it was really, really thick. I am very good at understanding Filipinos when they're speaking Philippine English. I'm pretty used to it. But this guy's his English accent was really hard to understand. So after like the fourth or fifth time he told me to take off my shoes or I didn't understand him, I said, can you just say it in Tagalog because I don't understand? And his face, he got furious because I was basically saying, your English sucks so bad, I can't understand you. And I think to him that meant, I was calling him low class when really I was stressed out because the security guy is giving me commands and I can't understand him. So when he told me in Filipino to take off your shoes, I took off my shoes instantly, which I think he thought I was making a power play or something, or that I was kind of dissing him because I instantly understood what he said when he said it in Tagalog. But so then later, his way to gain the upper hand again was to make me throw out my contact lens solution, which he did with glee. But power tripping, that Filipino power tripping, that's another subject I'll get to maybe in another video. But everyone does it, but it seems Filipinos have a unique twist on it. But where was I? So anyways, the people in the meeting where my wife was getting kind of a group counsel thing where they told her, if you're getting abused or whatever, here's a number you can call, here's how to get back home, and whatnot. A lot of the other girls seemed like they were marrying an American to get out of poverty and stuff. So one thing about one thing about being a Phil-M relationship is a lot of, and it's not just, it's Filipinos are actually kind of more presumptuous and judgmental, I think, than most Americans are. As far as, I don't think Americans assume you're marrying for ulterior nefarious motives. It just, they hear an American's married to a Filipino. But I think a lot of Filipinos assume that there's a power gap between the American and the Filipino, which I'm sure the stereotype is there for a reason, because when you're in Manila and you see other foreigners, Westerners particularly, you tend to notice the things like the guy is way old and obese with a pretty good looking Filipina that could be his daughter, but that's his wife. So I think it's kind of strange. Like the first time I was in the Philippines ever in Manila, and most of my stories are based in Manila because we're based out of Quezon City. But people would ask me, why are you in the Philippines? Which is so weird because I've never asked a foreigner in America, why are you here? Because there's any, number of legitimate reasons to be in America for tourism, work, what have you. But a lot of Filipinos have this negative attitude, especially within Manila. Like, why are you here? Not because they're curious, but why would anyone who's doesn't have to be here or something like that? That's the impression I get, and it's it's kind of a turnoff, honestly, because it's so inferiority complexy, that it's just unattractive when Filipinos do that a lot, and they do it kind of as a joke, but they're also kind of serious about it, and I wish they kind of wouldn't do that, because there's things there's good things and bad things about any place you are at. We're all from somewhere, and for example, this last time was the first time I ever had been into the Philippines with a friend. And whenever my friend would ask any of my wife's friends or my friends, like, oh, what's there to do in Manila? You get this, like, oh, there's nothing to do. You have to go to the beach in Boracay or something like that. Or they just can't think of a single thing to do. And if you ask any American from a major city, you would say, hey, what's there to do here? And they would at least come up with, hey, I like this restaurant, or there's this thing to do, or something like that. They can come up with something, but if you ask a person from Manila, what's there to do in Manila, they say you have to drive over an hour away to go to Batangas or Baguio or something. They never can say even one thing positive to do in Manila, and I don't know if they're faking or they're just embarrassed to a Westerner about how Manila is. The Filipinos assume a lot about Westerners too. Like they assume that we all just want to stay in swanky hotels and not be amongst the masa or something. When that's very presumptuous too, because there's a lot of travelers who like to do real traveling and be amongst the people without pretension and things like that. They kind of just assume a lot about Americans, particularly, I think, which I think I wish they would kind of have more of an open mind about what American motives and what we like to do are. They kind of assume a whole lot about us, like what we would like to do. Like I kept having to reassure my wife's family, don't worry, my friend, he won't mind this, he won't mind that, because they're very, I won't say like it's not preoccupied with porma and stuff, but they're assuming that we are used to the best and will complain and complain and complain. And if somebody is truly like that, that's too bad, and that person has a problem. But just assuming that we're all like that, it was bothersome. For example, there's and I think Filipinos do this a lot. There's like a Pugad Baboy, which is a comic book. There's a Filipino comic book that I like to read a lot, and I practice Tagalog on it because it's fun to read, and it's I get the jokes sometimes. So they had a Phil Am cousin who came to visit Manila, and the whole time she's there, all the cousin's doing is complaining, and the family is so patient and explains to her, this is how we do it this way because this, and it's just so self-serving because this comic is written by Filipinos for Filipinos, which means there's something in the national spirit that they want to congratulate themselves or something for this, but the cousin being obnoxious, I don't see why you would want to depict that, and it seems like a pretty big stereotype that they have, even with ethnically Filipino but grew up in America. So I think it's worse, even the presumptions, if you're not Filipino and American. But I'm used to a lot of things about Manila. You can't get used to the traffic. I mean, because when it takes you 3 hours to go somewhere that should take 30 minutes, if there was not so much traffic, you can't really get used to that. But I mean, when I'm in the Philippines, I bathe with tabo, which is the bucket and the ladle instead of a shower most of the time. I try to go, native. I don't like the way that sounds, but I try to do as they do and not be as judgmental and that's partially for my own mental health too, because you'll go crazy if you try to fight the Philippines and make it your way or the way it should be. But sometimes I do trip up and complain too much, but that's after cracking, because there's so many things that, especially with Americanized, you get upset when you see things because you're waiting in a line and you shouldn't have to wait this long if this employee would just take their job more seriously, or any number of things in Manila that can bother you, especially compared to what you're used to. So I try to be more Filipino in that way, because Filipinos are um, amazingly able to adjust to adverse conditions like no other people on earth, which I guess they just have to, because if you're trying to get home in the MRT, you need to let five of them go before you can even get on the MRT, or if the power goes out on the MRT, just the traffic and all the things, life is much harder in the Philippines. All the things that you have to get used to make you more patient than Americans, which is both a good and a bad thing. It's admirable in some ways, but when it goes to the point of being accepting and tolerating things that you shouldn't be tolerant of, I think that's part of a lot of the problems with the Philippines. Because if you're trained that you just have to go with it or else you'll just get upset, a lot of things that you should get upset and you should correct kind of slide in the Philippines. And it's no Filipino wants to hear this from an outsider, which I've grown to understand. But a lot of times as an outsider, you think things could be so much better with just a little bit of attention to detail and a little bit more care on the part of average Filipinos. And it's very, very frustrating. And I know frustration is, especially amongst academics and things, it's very hard to be aware of Western culture, I suppose. I'm not sure how to say this in the clearest way, but I guess to see the way things are done in the West, especially for all the Filipinos, OFWs who come home, and just people who've traveled in America or Europe or Australia, and you come home and you see the way things are done in a more organized society, and then you come home, you're going to be very frustrated because you've gotten used to a level of service or efficiency from bureaucracies overseas, which it's amazing. Only like a third of Americans have a passport. I think the way American culture would improve is if more people traveled overseas, because we'll say stuff about government inefficiency and complain about bureaucracy in America, but if you've been to the Philippines, you just have to laugh, because our bureaucracy is a dream to navigate compared to how it could be in the Philippines and similarly disorganized countries, So I think it would give a lot of Americans some much needed perspective, and maybe appreciate what we have a little bit more. But I don't know. I'll cover in some other videos. I'd really like to hear some feedback, especially from Filipinos, because it's very difficult to kind of relate and have a heart-to-heart talk with Filipinos in the same way that I can with Americans, not just because they're my countrymen and we completely share the same language, but even Filipinos with very good English. Sometimes it's really really hard to relate on a non-shallow level, which kind of concerns me, because maybe one day I'll have to live in the Philippines, and if I do worry about making meaningful friends. It just seems hard to have non-shallow conversations with Filipinos. And for sure part of that is going to be because I'm foreign, but it seems like, well, first off, Filipinos are very sensitive, and I'm from Chicago, so I live in the Northwest, so it's very in the Northwestern United States, where in Chicago people are very, very direct. So I get in trouble and butt heads a lot with people where I live now just because people are more towards the Filipino end of the sensitivity and indirect speech spectrum. Um, so I'm a very direct person. So it's hard sometimes to communicate with Filipinos because they have a sensitivity which in some ways I think allows them to be more concerned about the feelings of their peers and things like that, which is admirable too. But um, it's hard. For example, it's much easier to talk to a Filipino one on one, which you would think it would be easier for them to be in a group and outnumber you and feel more comfortable talking to you. But paradoxically, it's actually much better one on one because Filipinos are very conscious of making a mistake in English in a group, but if it's individually, they won't feel embarrassed if they screw up or say something stupid in front of other Filipinos. So they're all very, very forma and image conscious sometimes about they don't want to be embarrassed, especially in front of a foreigner, which makes it hard to make a real connection, which is it's frustrating because in my area I'm used to dealing with foreigners from all across the globe and somehow we make it work, and I feel like that's the way it should be, and it's very frustrating when since we're all human beings and it shouldn't be so hard to make a connection with people just from where they're from. That's one thing I'm really concerned about, because I don't want to move somewhere in the Philippines and just hang out with expats or something and gripe about the Philippines like a grumpy, stereotypical expat. I really don't want to do that. But this last trip has been kind of eye-opening because I had to deal with so much of the bureaucracy to get our church wedding, and it was so frustrating dealing with, if you give a Filipino a little bit of authority and power, they're so quick to power trip. For example, we were at one Catholic organization. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but we were trying to see a counselor to take care of the marriage process so that we could get the church wedding, even though we're already married. So it was a nightmare because the church doesn't consider us married at all, even though we're legally married and have been for a year. So anyways, we were waiting to be able to go in the elevator up to talk to our counselor, and there were three, I don't know why, but typical Philippine story, there's like three employees in doing the job of one guy and mainly just hanging out and talking. That's just the number one thing that happens in the Philippines. But we were given a card by the security guard behind this little stand and told to wait until he would tell us we could go up. And so he gave us this card and went with the number 2. We're like the only ones waiting there. And then he went back to talking to his buddies for 5 to 10 minutes. And then just randomly he said, okay, you can go up. There was no reason we couldn't go up other than he wanted to feel important and like a big shot. It was just so pathetic, but that's often when a Filipino has a little bit of authority, petty authority like that, they do love to lord it over people. And I don't know, it's just one thing I really don't like about the Philippines is the petty power plays sometimes people play, which is actually contrary. I mean, it bugs. It's not like part of Filipino culture where everyone's okay with it, because it bugs Filipinos too. But I don't know, something about. I think it's a way to differentiate yourself from, because Filipinos are very hierarchy oriented. So it's one way to make sure you're not at the bottom, I guess, is if you have a little bit of authority, you kind of throw your weight around in really petty Banana Republic ways. One thing I don't like, it's also hard to relate on another level to Filipinos, because American, and especially Americans, we're the quickest ones to talk crap about ourselves and our own country. And I'm not one of those people who thinks America has it all figured out and we're the best country, number one, whatever. I'm not one of those people at all. But because we kind of air our dirty laundry out internationally, but not every country does this like we do. We're quick to self-criticize. Filipinos will kind of criticize themselves, but they will circle the wagons if any outsider criticizes at all. And they will have this Pinoy pride thing when any foreigner says anything remotely negative about the Philippines as constructive criticism. For example, like Claire Dames not being allowed to come back to the country because I'm not exactly sure what she said. She said something about roaches in Manila. So now she's like banned from the Philippines or something. This is the most childish, that's like unimaginably childish. No other country would do something so petty. But if you're a foreigner and people will ask you, oh, how do you like the Philippines? I learned long ago, they're not actually asking you by the American standard. If someone asks you, if I asked another American, I said, hey, how do you like Seattle? I want to hear the good, the bad. I want to hear what you think, or I wouldn't ask you. But Filipinos will ask you, how do you like Manila? How do you like the Philippines? And I hate this question now, because now that I've spent enough time in the Philippines, I understand they don't want to actually hear what you think. They want to hear what you like, because they can't handle even the barest criticism. So it's a very immature attitude, and not being able to hear even the slightest criticism, if it comes from a foreigner, means I can't have the same depth of a relationship with most Filipinos that I can with certain, Americans, or any other country, where I can tell them what I really feel, and they're not going to instantly clam up and get offended or circle the wagons. And it's just, don't ask me a question if you don't want the real answer. And I've learned to be polite, and I've learned not to offend Filipinos by saying what I like about Manila only, and not telling them the good, the bad, how I really feel. But because I can't tell them how I really feel, it makes it difficult to make a friendship that's kind of deep and meaningful. So I could take them and leave them sometimes. But there are, especially amongst Filipinos who've traveled, I guess, and who are more, I don't know if it's just educated, but there are some that you can kind of be a little bit realer with. But I'm never going to want to be one of those people who just complains about the Philippines and talks trash about it, because the Philippines gave me my wife. I've had experiences in the Philippines that are great, that give me perspective that most Americans don't have. I'm trying to learn the language. So I don't want to be one of those people that just gripes about it. And I just want to kind of have more real bonds with people, because the shallow ones don't mean anything to me, because I already have friends and I already have acquaintances. So I need people that I can kind of be real with, because otherwise I could just take them or leave them. But I guess that's good. I've rambled on for a long time. That's a good starter starter video. I'd really be interested in any input from Filipinos. If you want, you can type in Tagalog too as a response, and I'll understand it, because I'm much better at reading Tagalog and responding in Tagalog typing than I am speaking, just because I have more time to work on my crappy grammar and stuff like that, and it's much easier for me to read. So you guys can respond in Tagalog if you want, whatever you're more comfortable with, or Taglish, whatever. Any Americans who have experience with the Philippines too, I'd like to see if what your feedback is on some of the things getting associated with the Philippines, or any Filipinos or any other foreigners, and maybe not American, but you spent time in the Philippines too. I just like to get kind of a good discussion going. So if anybody has anything to say, just go ahead and leave a comment, and I'll make some more videos about Filipino stuff later. Take care, guys.